Have you ever felt the quiet ache of another's suffering so deeply that your own heart seemed to bow? Not from pity, not from duty, but from something ancient and wordless within you that simply whispered, "I will not leave you." This is where the Bodhisattva path begins, not with ambition, but with a heart that dares to feel, not with answers, but with the courage to stay present, awake, tender, and true. Great compassion is not a reaction. It is the root, the vow, the return. Welcome to Trandy Wisdom, where every story is a compelling truth. There's an old story that tells of a bodhisattva standing at the very threshold of nirvana. The gates were open. The path was clear. But just as he was about to step across, he paused. Not because he lacked purity, not because he doubted the path, but because he heard a cry. A child who had just lost her mother, a soldier trembling after taking a life, an old woman sitting hungry by the side of the road. And in that moment, from the very center of his being, a vow emerged. As long as even one being remains in suffering, I shall not enter nirvana. It wasn't a grand statement. It was simply the sound of great compassion, speaking its truth. 1. A story of the root, where all vows begin. The rain had not stopped all night. Soft, unrelenting, like the breathing of the earth. It fell over the mountains, the rivers, the rooftops, and the silent paths between villages in the early morning. As the fog clung to the trees like memory, an old monk stepped outside his hut with bare feet and folded hands. He was not in a hurry. There was no need to be. The world was still enough for him to hear the sound of a single drop falling into a bamboo bowl. That is where all bodhisattva vows begin. Not in temples of stone or beneath golden statues, but in a moment of pure seeing, a moment when the heart, stripped of its defenses, trembles at the suffering of another. The path of a bodhisattva does not begin with ambition. It begins with sorrow. Not the kind of sorrow that drowns, but the kind that opens the door. A mother watching her child grow thin from hunger. A man holding his dying friend's hand in the dust of war. A young girl silently crying beside the ashes of her burned home. The bodhisattva is not born from enlightenment, but from a heart that can no longer look away. In the teachings of the Buddha, compassion is not a concept, it is a living stream. And from that stream, vows are born like flowers, blooming from fertile mud. A bodhisattva once said, "I do not practice for myself alone. I practice because my heart breaks for the world." There was no need to impress anyone with these words. They were not meant to be quoted. They were simply true. He had sat long enough with the wounded, breathed long enough beside the lonely, listened deeply enough to the voiceless, that his vow came not from willpower, but from love. The Buddha himself, before his great awakening beneath the Bodhi tree, was once a prince who walked beyond the palace walls and saw, for the first time, the truth of human life, aging, sickness, death. He was not unmoved. He did not recite a doctrine. He wept. And in his weeping, a seed was planted. This is the beginning of the Bodhisattva vow. Not theory, but tenderness. Not abstraction, but intimacy. We suffer. And because we suffer, we understand. And when we truly understand, we cannot turn our backs. We vow not to save others because we are strong, but because we have touched the depth of their pain and recognized it as our own. In the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha speaks of the mind that is vast and boundless, filled with loving kindness for all beings, without exception. This boundless mind does not belong to saints. It is available to all of us. Even a single moment of true compassion opens the gate to the Bodhisattva path. A monk once asked a teacher, "When does the path begin?" The teacher smiled and pointed to a bird with a broken wing. "There," he said, "when you kneel to shelter that suffering with your breath." Great vows begin, not when we feel powerful, but when we allow ourselves to be pierced by the cries of the world. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, the Bodhisattva Samantabhadra is said to make countless vows to serve beings in all realms. But before any of those vows take shape, his heart is moved deeply, unstoppably, by the pain of others. His vows are not separate from his compassion. They are its natural expression. To vow, in the Bodhisattva sense, is not to promise something we must achieve. It is to allow our heart to stretch beyond its ordinary limits, to let go of the small self, the self concerned with only its safety, its success, its pleasure, and embrace a greater self, vast as the sky, intimate as breath. I remember walking once along a dusty road in Cambodia. A child approached me barefoot, holding a piece of bread she had saved. Her eyes were bright, her stomach clearly empty. But when she saw another child crying nearby, she tore the bread in two and gave it away. That was her vow. No ceremony, no scripture, just the pure act of one heart recognizing another. When the heart breaks open, a vow arises, not to escape this world, but to walk more deeply into it, to stand beside the poor, the sick, the abandoned, not as saviors, but as companions, as those who have seen suffering and no longer wish to turn their faces. This is why, in the Bodhisattva tradition, the first and greatest vow is not "I will become enlightened," but rather, "Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them." Such a vow is not literal. One person cannot save all beings, but the vow itself transforms the heart. It becomes a compass, a lantern in the dark, a whisper of courage when the path becomes steep. The great Zen teacher Dogen once said, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be awakened by all things." When we forget the self in true compassion, the vow does not arise from effort. It arises from emptiness, the fertile emptiness where nothing is held back and everything is given. There is a lotus that blooms in still waters. It opens not from trying, but from resting deeply in the mud. So too, the Bodhisattva vow arises when we are no longer striving to fix, to change, to accomplish. It arises when we are present, open, listening. We hear a scream, a silence, a shiver, and something ancient inside us answers, "Yes, I will stay. I will walk with you." This is not heroism. It is not perfection. It is the soft vow that arises when a heart remembers its true nature. A vow, then, is not the beginning of the journey. It is the fruit of presence. And its root, always, always, is great compassion. 2. The scriptures whisper it too, a voice across time. Long before ink met palm leaves, before the chanting of monks echoed through bamboo groves and stone halls, there was a silence that listened. In that silence, something ancient stirred, a compassion deeper than speech, a tenderness vast as the sky. When the early teachings of the Buddha were first spoken, they were not delivered like sermons. They were breaths, shared under trees, along rivers, on dusty roads. They were seeds, quiet, humble, and infinitely alive. The scriptures do not shout. They do not beg for attention. They whisper. And if you lean your ear against them, not just with intellect, but with the marrow of your being, you will hear not commands or ideologies, but a living invitation to touch life deeply, to suffer with all beings, and to love without conditions. In one such teaching, the Buddha spoke of a boundless heart, one that radiates in all directions, like light spilling from a full moon. It is called metta, loving kindness. But it is more than kindness. It is the quiet courage to remain open in a world that wounds. It is the vow to keep the heart soft, even when the mind grows weary. This is not a philosophy. It is a path, a way of walking, breathing, seeing. The scriptures do not begin with metaphysics. They begin with suffering, because that is where compassion takes root. And from that root, the Bodhisattva vow blooms, not as a moral obligation, but as a response to the unbearable beauty and pain of existence. One scripture tells of a Bodhisattva who hears the cries of the world and, moved beyond thought, resolves never to rest until every being is free. His vow does not arise from ambition, but from intimacy. He does not set out to become holy. He simply cannot bear to see another suffer. This, too, is the way of the texts, not abstract promises, but stories of hearts broken open. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, there are passages like galaxies, so vast they seem almost impossible. They speak of countless realms, immeasurable lifetimes, and vows as large as the skies. Yet what remains after the metaphors fade is not the grandeur. It is the tenderness, the unwavering presence of a being who says, "I will walk with you, even in hell, until you are free." The sacred texts of the Mahayana tradition do not describe enlightenment as escape. They describe it as entering the world more fully, with eyes wide open and hands unafraid to touch the broken places. They remind us that liberation is not a personal possession, but a shared awakening. And so, compassion in these teachings is not merely a virtue. It is the ground, the soil from which every vow, every practice, every act of awakening must grow. Without it, the path is dry, brittle, hollow. With it, even the most mundane moment becomes luminous. In the Brahmajala Bodhisattva Precept Sutra, the essence of ethical conduct is not restraint. It is love, not repression, but reverence. The precepts are not rules imposed from outside, but songs that arise naturally from a heart that has remembered its original melody. To refrain from killing, from stealing, from speaking falsely. These are not burdens. They are expressions of a deep vow to protect life, to honor truth, to cause no harm. There is a story of a wandering ascetic who came across a dying deer. Its body trembled with fear, its breath shallow. The ascetic sat beside it, doing nothing. No prayers, no rituals, just presence. Hours passed, and in that stillness, a scripture was written, not on paper, but in the silence between two living beings. That is the kind of teaching the texts invite us into, a way of being, not just believing. In the Vimalakirti Nirdesha Sutra, the layman Vimalakirti teaches not from a cave or forest, but from within the marketplace, amidst the noise of daily life. He reminds us that awakening does not require us to flee the world. It asks us to love the world more completely. His words are sharp and kind, cutting through spiritual pride and comfort. If you wish to understand emptiness, he says, begin with compassion. Because without compassion, emptiness becomes dry philosophy. With compassion, It becomes a space where all things are embraced and none are rejected. This is what the scriptures are always pointing to, not a truth to hold, but a heart to open. The ancient texts are not concerned with status or identity. They do not ask who is a monk or a householder, a sage or a fool. They ask, can you see clearly? Can you feel deeply? Can you walk this earth with a heart that does not turn away? The Bodhisattva vows, as recorded in these scriptures, are not goals to be completed. They are mirrors. When we read them, we do not measure how far we have to go. We remember who we are. Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. The words are impossible, but they are not meant to be literal. They are meant to transform the shape of our aspiration, to widen the circle of our love until it includes even those we cannot understand. One can read these sutras and be overwhelmed by their scale. One can also sit with them quietly and find a single line that echoes through the soul for a lifetime. A line like, the Bodhisattva dwells in the heart of all beings, not above them, not outside them, but within. When you walk slowly through the forest, when you sit by a stranger in grief, when you bow not in ritual, but in recognition, you are walking the teachings, not because you are a scholar, but because you are alive. And to be truly alive, the scriptures remind us, is to care, to weep when the world weeps, to listen when there are no words, to stand in the fire of suffering and say, without flinching, I will not leave you. This is what the scriptures whisper, not commandments, but companionship, not doctrines, but doorways. They are not frozen relics. They are breathing, weeping, walking songs, echoes of the vow that has no end. And that vow, if you are still enough, is already inside you. 3. The echo of the elders, ancient voices, modern hearts. In a quiet field of golden grass, the wind moves through the tall blades, like fingers across strings. Each blade bends, not in defeat, but in response. Subtle, fluid, open, so too does the human heart, when it listens deeply, when it bows to something greater, not with fear, but with reverence. For centuries, the wind of compassion has carried the voices of the wise across time, not to command us, but to awaken us. These are not voices locked in old languages or bound to ancient robes. They are echoes, living currents. You do not need to be a scholar to hear them. You need only to be still. Among these echoes is the sound of a vow, spoken not once, but again and again, by those who walked barefoot into the fire of suffering, not to escape, but to stay. They left behind not monuments or dogma, but the imprint of presence. Their teachings are not things to recite. They are ways to breathe. Long ago, a great teacher said, compassion is the root of awakening. Without it, even wisdom is dry. He wasn't speaking to monks alone. He was speaking to anyone whose hands had ever held a trembling child, anyone who had ever wept for someone they barely knew. His words still flow like a river under the soil of modern life. Another teacher once wrote, Bodhicitta arises from compassion, just as a lotus rises from the mud. He was not crafting poetry. He was naming a truth as old as rain, that the heart must break open to grow. And in that breaking, something vast enters, a willingness not just to care, but to carry. These voices are not history. They are breath. And if you listen between the noise of the world, you may find they are already inside you. In this age of speed and steel, of screens that flicker and hearts that scatter, there are still moments when the old teachings slip quietly into view. A man in a crowded subway gives up his seat without thought. A nurse rests her hand on the shoulder of a dying patient and whispers, "I'm right here." A young woman walks through a city, handing out bread, not as charity, but as kinship. These are not random acts of kindness. They are the modern faces of an ancient vow. The voices of the elders do not demand robes or titles. They live in the simple decision to be present, to meet another's pain, not with solutions, but with softness. The vow of the Bodhisattva is often misunderstood as heroic, even extraordinary. But in truth, it is ordinary, radiantly, profoundly ordinary. It is the vow to remain human in a world that often forgets how to pause before reacting, to speak words that heal, to walk not faster, but more consciously, so that we do not trample the unnoticed beauty along the way. One elder wrote, "All joy in this world comes from wishing others to be happy. All suffering comes from wishing only oneself to be happy." These are not commandments. They are mirrors. In them, we see our daily choices reflected. The way we hold the door, the way we hold each other, the way we hold even our own brokenness. To embody the voice of the elder is not to recite their teachings. It is to live them into the ground beneath our feet. When we listen to the wind with the same attention we give to our thoughts, when we offer silence instead of noise, when we bow inwardly to the suffering of another, that is the continuation of ancient wisdom. And there is no age requirement. A child who wipes the tears of a friend on the playground is already walking with the great ones. A teenager who listens without judgment is already participating in the vow. A mother who rocks her infant through the night is already breathing the old scriptures into life. These voices ask not for followers, but for companions. They do not need worship. They need witnesses, those who are willing to listen, not with ears alone, but with the entirety of being. In a forest far from cities, there grows an ancient tree. Its bark is weathered, its roots are wide. It does not speak. And yet, when you sit beside it long enough, something in your chest begins to loosen. You remember that you belong to something older than your worries, that you are part of a lineage, not of blood, but of heart. The elders remind us that we are never starting from scratch. Every time we light a candle in the dark, someone, somewhere, did it first. Every time we choose gentleness over retaliation, a path is walked again. Their lives were not perfect, nor are ours meant to be. The vow does not ask for perfection. It asks for presence. To hear the echo of the elders is not to chase after the past. It is to recognize that their love is still moving through us, that the waters of their compassion continue to flow, not in temples or books alone, but in the gestures we offer one another, day by day. You do not need credentials to continue the vow. You do not need to understand Sanskrit or Pali. You need only to ask, with sincerity, where is suffering? And how can I walk with it, not away from it? The answers are already here, in the pause before you speak, in the hand you extend, in the breath you follow back to its source. And when you listen to that breath, deep, steady, without adornment, you will find that it is not yours alone. It is ancient. It is shared. It carries the voices of countless ones who came before, and countless more who will come after. This is the echo of the elders. It is not gone. It is not distant. It is here, folded into your next step, your next choice, your next act of compassion. And when you offer that act, not with pride, but with humility, you become not just a student of the ancient path, but its living continuation. 4. Why it matters. A life with vows. A heart with compassion. A vow is not something carved in stone. It does not begin with dramatic declarations or end with perfect fulfillment. A true vow begins where your breath trembles, where your heart aches as it opens. A vow begins when you see someone in pain, and something inside you whispers, "I cannot look away." It is born, not from certainty, but from a kind of fierce tenderness, and it does not require you to become someone else. It invites you to become more fully who you already are. Why does a life of vows matter? In a world that rewards speed and sharpness, a vow is a soft rebellion. It slows us down. It roots us. It reminds us that we are not here merely to survive, to accumulate, to win. We are here to be touched, to respond, to walk gently across the surface of this earth, and sometimes to kneel. A vow is not about control. It is not a shield against failure. Rather, it is a compass, quietly turning us again and again toward compassion, even when we have lost our way. The Bodhisattva's vow, to save all beings, to end all delusions, to master all teachings, to attain the awakened path, is vast and impossible by design. It is not meant to be completed like a task. It is meant to awaken the boundless heart, to stretch the fabric of our aspiration until it can hold not just our loved ones, but our enemies. Not just the joyful, but the grieving. Not just the worthy, but all. In the space of a single day, this vow takes many forms. It looks like a nurse who shows up for her shift again, even after being broken by the sorrow of the night before. It looks like a father who listens to his child's anger without defensiveness, knowing there is pain beneath the words. It looks like someone who chooses to speak gently when they could have spoken with harm. The vow matters not because it makes us special, but because it makes us real. In a world of appearances, it is a return to authenticity. The vow does not live in doctrine. It lives in the way we touch a shoulder, in the way we wait with someone who is crying, even if we don't know what to say. It lives in our willingness to stay when it would be easier to run. To live with a vow is to say, I will not be perfect, but I will be present. I will not always know what to do, but I will care. I will not avoid the world's suffering, but I will walk into it with open hands. Compassion, in its deepest form, is not a feeling. It is a way of seeing, a way of being. It means we do not draw lines around who deserves love. It means we do not turn away from what is difficult or inconvenient. A heart with compassion is a heart without walls. And a life with vows is a life in which every moment becomes a doorway into that heart. This matters because suffering is everywhere, not only in faraway lands or dramatic headlines, but in the person sitting across from you, in the tired eyes of the cashier, in the silence of your friend's unanswered message. It matters because someone, somewhere, is holding on by a thread, and your one moment of presence might be the thread. The Bodhisattva Vow teaches us that it is not enough to seek our own peace. True peace arises when we realize that our well-being is inseparable from the well-being of others, that to heal ourselves is to heal the world, and to heal the world is to return to the quiet garden of our own heart. This is not sentimental. It is the most practical truth. Because when we live without connection, we suffer. When we remember our interconnectedness, we return to wholeness. A life with vows does not require grand gestures. Sometimes it is the smallest act that carries the most weight. A glass of water brought to a tired friend, a hand on the back of someone in grief, a deep breath taken before responding in anger. These are not small things. They are the vow made visible. They are the places where compassion breathes. What makes a vow sacred is not the words we use, but the sincerity of our attention. To live a vowed life is to live awake, to notice the hunger behind someone's smile, to hear the sadness hiding behind their laughter, to step outside of our own story long enough to honor someone else's. The ancient teachings do not ask us to become saints. They ask us to become quiet enough to feel the world. And once we feel the world, how can we not respond? Not with pity, not with superiority, but with solidarity, with humility, with the simple, quiet vow, I will walk with you. It matters because a heart without compassion is a heart that forgets it belongs. And when we forget we belong, we become afraid. We fight. We close. But a heart that remembers its vows, a heart that has been softened by grief and opened by love, knows that it is never alone, even in sorrow, even in silence. When we live with a vow, we do not escape suffering, but we are no longer afraid of it. We know it as a teacher. We know it as a place where love reveals itself. We carry others not as burdens, but as extensions of our own breath. And in the end, when our own breath begins to fade, it is not our accomplishments that will matter. It is not the titles or the trophies. It is the times we loved well, the times we listened, the times we stayed, the times we whispered to another soul, you are not alone. A life with vows is not a life of certainty. It is a life of response. And in each response, the world is made a little softer, a little more whole. So let the vow arise, not from obligation, but from love. Let it be as simple as a breath and as vast as the sky. Let it be renewed with each morning sun. Let it carry you, not to the peak of some imagined enlightenment, but deeper into the fragile, radiant heart of this very world, here, where we vow not to fix everything, but to love everything. And in doing so, we remember who we are, of all the vows a bodhisattva can make. To save all beings, to end all delusions, to master all teachings, to attain enlightenment, none are possible without great compassion as the root. So next time your heart aches for someone, don't rush to escape it. Sit with it, feel it fully. It may just be the beginning of your own vow. Welcome to Trandy Wisdom, where every story is a compelling truth, from heart to heart.